Hi, I'm Chris Cooper. Welcome to the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to show you how to treat a crepe myrtle bark scale infestation, and Rick Putwell is here with advice on planting spring flowering bulbs. All that and more is just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South, so stay with us.
This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Well, here at WKNO we have a problem with our crepe myrtles. Looks like we have the crepe myrtle bark scale.
That's right. Looks like we got a fungus among us. That's bad.
So how do you think the scales got here, Mr. D?
You know, I don't know. These were first identified in Texas. Is that right? In the
That's
United
right.
States. So there's got to be some windborne activity. I know the males we know have wings and can fly, but the females are sessile. They can't move, so they couldn't have come in on their own. I think we probably helped them a little bit. Don't you
I think we helped them too, and I think birds may have also brought them over too. What do you think about that?
Birds.
Perhaps.
But transporting plants around, you know, we probably inadvertently move more critters and
I'm sure.
bad things than we really mean to.
Right.
And but that would make sense.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, there's some heavy infestations here in Shelby County. I mean, I've gotten calls from, Germantown, Bartlett, Midtown, Collierville, so they're pretty much all over the place now.
In 1 year, I mean, it's a little over a year ago when you first discovered them in this
Right,
area.
right. Dr. Hale and Dr. Wyndham came down last year there in Germantown and saw a couple of cases, but this year, for some reason, it's just exploded, just multiplied. So they're pretty much all around the area now.
I wonder how closely they are related to their Asian counterpart, and they're common over in across the ocean. And I wonder how close this race is that we have here is to the Asian
I don't know, that's a good question.
variety. I don't know.
I don't know. But right now, we just know they're pretty much specific to the crepe myrtles,
Right.
which is a mainstay here, pretty much in the South. Everybody grows crepe myrtles, so we'll see what happens.
And it's been a worry-free plant, a plant that we didn't have any
Pest-free.
pest
Yeah.
and
So this is how we're to treat the crepe myrtle bark scales. This is what we've been telling the homeowner to use.
this is what, imidacloprid?
It is. It's the active ingredient. It sure is. And of course, our crepe myrtle is multi-trunk. So you have to make sure that you read and follow the label. We definitely want people to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure the distance in inches around each tree trunk at about 4.5 feet. Okay. We're going to add together, and then we're going to multiply by 0.75, and that's going to give us the ounces that we add to a gallon of water.
Okay. That's a lot more specific than, I don't guess that's that much more specific than a lot of pesticides, but it's kind of a different way of figuring out how much to apply usually.
Yeah. But yeah, make sure that you read and follow the label on that, okay?
That's the law.
All right, let's do that. All right, Mr. D, so we're going to measure 4.5 feet up.
Diameter, breast height.
All right. And then at that level, we're going to measure in diameter the individual trunks.
All
okay?
of these. It looks like we're going to have, what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11?
11
measurements.
Okay. All right, let's start with the first one. And you're recording this, right?
Yep.
Okay, see, that will be 5.
Okay.
Okay, this is going to be a little bigger. Right here. And look at all the scales on here, though. My gosh.
Yeah, it's covered up in
It's
city
coming up pretty
mold.
good. All right. Yeah, that's going to be 5.5.
Okay.
You want to catch that?
That right there.
Come up here. Bring it through right there. 6.
Getting bigger.
Yeah, getting pretty big. This one's a small one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's 4.
Okay. Looks like we're averaging around 5.
Yeah, it looks so. You want to see if you can get those on that side?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Trade.
record right there.
Uh, 4.75.
Okay.
4 3/4. Looks like about 3.5.
3.5.
5.
Okay.
6.
6. It's a big one.
Mm-hmm. It's like 3.5.
Okay.
Looks like 4 3/4. 4.75.
Okay.
And that's 3.75. Is that it?
All right, so that's going to be it.
Okay.
So
Let's
the-
figure now. Calculate.
Yeah, we got to do math.
Oh man.
All right, Mr. D. So we have all of the measurements. So what we have?
We
here?
do. It came up to 51.75 total inches, and we divide that or multiply that times 0.75,
Okay.
and we came out with 38.8. So we
Okay.
need 38.8 ounces of the product in a gallon of water.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's go
That's
for
a
it.
big plant.
Yeah, it is. Go for it. And we always want people to be safe.
We do. Follow directions.
Follow the label.
It's the law.
Wear your gloves.
Yeah. Put your rubber gloves on.
Okay. All right. Let's shake it up real good here. As you see, it's a pretty green color.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go. Sure is.
Yeah, look at that. This is also a fertilizer. It's a 2-1-to-1 fertilizer in here.
Okay, good deal.
All right, so what's that, 38.8 ounces?
38.8.
Okay. We're gonna put that there. Put this into our gallon of water here.
That's turning
No.
green too.
Yeah, look at that green color, I tell you.
Okay,
Think that's pretty good?
I'll do the trick. Need to stir it up a bit.
Yeah, stir it up there. Make sure we get it in a solution. Yeah.
What do you just put it under the drip line, pretty much, or all
But
up?
you know, the label says get it as close,
As close to the trunk
to
as
the
you
trunk
can?
as you possibly
Okay.
can.
Okay,
Again, we're following the label.
that's right.
Close to the trunk as you possibly can.
Okay. You got the gloves on.
And we're gonna get this. All right, Mr. D. We're gonna go ahead and pour as close to the trunk as we possibly can here.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll just try to go around here. Yeah.
It'd be nice if they'd start falling off right now.
It would be.
I don't think it works that way, do you?
I don't think it works that fast.
Yeah.
And it will tell you on the label that, you know, according to the size of the tree, it may take, you know, a couple of months,
Right.
you know, for it to actually take effect. Okay. And there you have it. You know, the
Okay.
roots will take it up systemically, and then we'll wait a couple of months or so, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, to be on the safe side, we better treat the rest of these crepe myrtles here, don't you think?
I think so. While we do that, let's take a look at the calendar. Okay, we'll see what happens to our scales in a couple of months here. Rick, do y'all have any scales at the Botanic Garden?
So far, we've escaped it, but I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
You
'cause
need
it's
to take
everywhere.
a shower before you leave here.
I think I better.
Don't take any back with you. Well, look, I know y'all have beautiful flowering bulbs, so let's get into this. So
Okay.
when is the best time to plant various species of bulbs?
Okay, that's a great question. You like to start when the weather breaks, which is now, you know, it's getting cooler. And daffodils you can plant now. And a lot of the smaller bulbs you can plant now, but tulips and hyacinths, it's good to wait until about the 1st of December. Years ago, I talked to one of the Dutch bulb growers that was here that we buy from, and they said the ideal time in Memphis is about the first week in December for those bulbs, because the soil needs to be cool enough. You kind of impair the bud that's already formed in there of the tulip if you plant it when the soil's too warm.
Okay, so we have the ideal time now. That's good. Okay. So what species are the best perennials in our climate?
The best are daffodils. You
Daffodils.
know, daffodils grow here for generations, and you know the biggest problem is they end up being in too much shade as the trees grow, or the clumps just get too thick, and then you need to divide them. But daffodils, without a doubt, are the best perennial for us. Crocus and grape hyacinths will persist for a long time. Hyacinths and tulips, not so much.
Okay. Let me ask you this. So when do we need to divide those daffodils? Because we get that question a lot at the extension office.
Well, this is probably not the answer everyone would give you, but I would say when they're done blooming, you can still find them when the foliage is there.
Okay.
I would go ahead and dig them and replant them then, so that most of the time they'd probably be in May.
Okay.
The foliage is going to go ahead and senesce and die down anyway, but more than likely, if the clumps have gotten so thick that the bulbs in that clump are so small they're not blooming, they're going to skip a year anyway.
Okay.
And nothing's worse than waiting till the foliage is gone. You go in there with a fork and you speared half of them, and then what do you have? So I would say do it shortly after they're done blooming.
Shortly after they're done blooming. Okay. Good. What species are best treated as annuals?
Definitely tulips, and to a lesser degree hyacinths. Our summers just aren't cool enough for the foliage to mature slowly and form another flower, and then our soil is too hot. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about something else too.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into it. So what should you do when the bud foliage after the flowers are finished?
Okay. You should let it senesce, turn yellow on its own, and then you can remove it. A lot of times, if you let it get dry, you can just kind of pull it and it doesn't, the bulbs won't come up, or just cut it off. But you want to be sure that it has turned yellow, because that's the nutrition, you know, to form the new flower. And if the foliage isn't there to photosynthesize, you know, no new flowers the following year.
It just all makes sense.
Yeah, it's just a natural cycle. Just a natural cycle.
Okay.
Okay.
And we are talking about, of course, planting bulbs, so we have to know which way to turn the bulbs too, right?
Right. It's very, you know, they have a top and a bottom.
All right.
And if you'll look, there's a basal plate where the roots grow. You actually see on this narcissus bulb where the roots are. And of course, the foliage comes out of the bud at the top. So always, you know, as they always say with plants, green side up, but in this case, basal plate down.
Okay.
So, and all the bulbs are that way. We brought several different ones. These are grape hyacinth or muscari, which is one that has the little tiny purple flowers. You know, and those look really good in mass. I love to see big patches of those in front of tulips or daffodils, because it's just a nice foil.
Okay.
And they come in purple or white, and there's several varieties. This is narcissus, which are a smaller daffodil. Narcissus, there's hundreds and hundreds of varieties of daffodils and narcissus. And those do really well here. You could have a collection of hundreds of varieties of those if you wanted to. Hyacinths, you know, have the big spike flowers, and interestingly, the color of the bulb sometimes, so these are blue, so they're kind of a purplish bulb, but white hyacinths have kind of a white color to them, and pinks are more pinkish, so the color has something to do with it. Daffodil bulbs are toxic, and the foliage is toxic. You'll often see them in pastures where there's livestock, and the goats and the cows will leave them alone because they know that. They don't taste good, apparently. And it's also good if you have a vole or mold problem, because they will leave them alone too.
So the voles and moles will leave those alone?
Yes, they will, because they taste toxic, I guess.
Okay, all right.
Now, hyacinths I don't think are toxic, but they do cause a dermatitis if you touch them. I'll have to remember to wash my hands.
Oh, yes.
Some people are more susceptible to others, but I know I've had people at the garden where they've planted hyacinths and come in and their hands are kind of broken out, so I always recommend wearing gloves if you're going to handle very many, or, you know, over a long period of time.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So that's something good to know.
Okay, yes, that is good to know. Now, let's get into this. How about planting depth?
Okay.
How deep do they need to be planted?
Usually about 2 to 3 times the thickness of the bulb.
Okay.
And remembering our soil is heavy clay, they need good drainage. So, good garden soil preparation means that your soil, by the time you've added amendments, is a little bit higher than the surrounding grade, so that's fine. But also remember, the soil under the bulb is where the roots grow. So don't just improve it to the depth of the bulb. You need to improve it at least several inches below so the roots have some place to grow.
Okay.
And, not high nitrogen fertilizer, something a little higher in, potassium and phosphorus, lower in nitrogen. Do fertilize a little bit at the time you plant, and if they're ones that are perennial that you want to come back immediately around the time they're flowering so that those bulbs regenerate new blooms for the following year.
Well, this is some good stuff.
Okay.
There's a large daffodil society in town now.
There's
isn't
a
there?
new-
If people want more information about
Right. There had been a daffodil society in town which had kind of lived its life, and now they've re-energized and it's new, and they're doing lots of good things all over the area. Out at Shelby Farms at the Dixon, we're planting some stuff at our place and with them. So a lot of good.
Now, how do you plant the daffodils out at your place?
Well, 'cause we have Daffodil Hill, which you remember from when you worked there. And usually we have little augers on a drill and drill individual holes because they're in turf. If they're in a bed, then if the soil's loose, sometimes we remove a whole section and plant them that way. Sometimes we plant with a trowel if it's just a few.
Okay.
So it just depends on the conditions,
Good deal.
The auger works really well if you have to do a lot and it's in turf.
Okay. Well, look, we have one last question. Why are spring flowering bulbs often called Dutch bulbs?
Okay, and this is a good question. Most of the bulbs were from the Holy Land, like Iraq and Iran and Babylon and all those places where it was kind of a semi-desert climate, and the strategy of those, and fairly warm, but the strategy of those plants for survival was to grow quick when there were spring rains, mature, and then go dormant.
Okay.
But all the hybridization and all the work that's been done with them to improve the varieties was done in Europe, primarily in Holland.
Okay.
And they, of course, have a cold climate in the winter and a very cool summer, so the foliage matures slowly. So that's why they really do better further north, like the tulips and stuff will become good perennials if you have a cooler summer.
Okay.
But here, where it's hot,
Yes.
now some of the species ones, and if they show the pictures, there was one little yellow one that was a species tulip. Some of the species tulips, which are really diminutive little things, will do okay here if you do good soil preparation because they're closer to their desert relatives than these hybrids that have come out of Holland.
Wow.
Okay.
Pretty good information. Thanks, Rick. We definitely appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I think I need the desert relative.
Well, that's kind of what we have here.
Yeah. All right, well, here's our Q&A session. And Rick, we definitely want you to jump in there with us on some of
Okay.
these questions, okay? And here's the first one. We have a letter from Judy. She writes, can you start dogwood from seeds? And if so, how do you do it? So can you start it from seed?
Of course. It's a native tree. The important thing is, it's in a drupe and a little fruit, is to clean the pulp off of the seed. And the way we do seeds for trees, and when I worked for Trees by Tuleatus, we did it that way too.
Okay.
Usually you're doing small batches. So we take 1 or 2 gallon containers of well-drained potting soil,
Okay.
clean the seed as soon as it's ripe, and then store it dry in the refrigerator so it stays cool. And then we'd sow the seeds mostly around Thanksgiving time when the weather's starting to get cold.
Okay.
And sow them in the pots again, just like with bulbs, maybe twice the depth of the seed.
Okay.
And then group the pots together outdoors. And it doesn't have to be that protective of a place, but I would cover the whole group of pots with chicken wire so you don't have rodents getting in there and digging them up.
Yeah.
Leave them germinate at the right time of spring. They're normally stratified because they go through the cycle outside just as if nature had planted them, but you'll have a better success rate. And, you might have 25 seeds in a pot, but that's okay. Leave them for one season. That fall, you can separate them and either line them out in nursery row or plant them in individual pots, and in 2 or 3 years, you'd have trees big enough, for landscape size. And that works with a lot of trees that way.
Wow, that was good.
Letting Mother Nature do the scarification
Yeah,
for you.
scarification.
So much
Pretty
easier.
good, yeah, and it's probably better. Yeah.
Yes.
But make sure they're covered. I'm glad you mentioned that because you don't want the rodents to get in there and dig them out.
The
for sure.
chicken wire or some hardware cloth is really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
The squirrels will dig every
Yes, they will.
one of them up.
We've had red buckeyes where we planted them and couldn't even get them covered, and they were out there digging them out of the pots.
Oh, before you get them covered.
Yeah,
Oh, how about
yeah.
that? All right, Miss Judy, there you have it. Okay, here's our next question. We have a letter from Linda in Englewood, Tennessee. She writes, can you please tell me how to get a bittersweet plant to grow berries? I've been told I need both a male and a female plant. Now I have 2 plants and still no berries. How old does the female plant need to be to have berries? And guess what? If we can answer this question, it would make several women very happy. So let's make the women happy.
There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts in there.
Okay.
Okay. There's Asian and American bittersweet both. And we don't know from that question if she has a male and a female or not. She just has two bittersweet plants.
Right, just two. That's all
It's
we
like
know.
saying I have two Cocker Spaniels and they're not having puppies. Well, they might both be the same gender. Also, the plant has to be mature, and that probably depends on the conditions. If it's in really rich garden soil, it may be in a vegetative state, just like a fruit tree that's been overly fertilized. So I would lay off the fertilizer. I would do a little root pruning, go out maybe 18 inches from the base of the plant with a sharpshooter. I'd like to do that around Labor Day, but I'd still do it this fall.
Okay. So you
Cut
still
off
give
some
away-
roots
okay.
and see what happens. But if she doesn't have both genders, nothing may happen.
Is there a way to tell the difference between a male
From
and a
the
female?
flowers.
From the flower.
Yeah. But obviously they have to get to that point, you know.
Yeah, it has to get to the point of flowering. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. D, anything to add? I see you over there.
You covered it. You covered it. You know, you got two
I've answered
males,
this. I've answered this before.
You got two males, you're out of luck. You have two females, you're out of luck, and so we just need to figure out what you got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She needs to go to a reputable nursery where they have them labeled, and you know.
Buy one of each.
Correct.
Buy a male and a female.
Right.
Leave the two that she's got
Right.
there.
Because she may be pleasantly surprised.
That's right.
Yeah.
Buy a male and a female, and she may have two females already there, and
Right.
then
I-
that male,
male and
that male is perfectly capable of fertilizing.
If
three
she had
females.
20 females, she'd be fine. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
20, huh? All right, Miss Linda, there you have it. We hope we made you and the ladies happy.
Those
Mr. D?
berries are poisonous, aren't they?
Yeah, I wouldn't eat 'em.
Bittersweet.
I wouldn't eat them.
Yeah,
You know, birds
yeah,
will eat them, but you know, birds can eat a lot of things that we
We
can't.
can't. Right.
Okay. And there you have it. Here's our next one. My roses are pretty and looking good. Do they need to be pruned before winter sets in?
I can tell you what we do at the garden. We call it wind pruning.
Wind pruning.
And when you get to, around Thanksgiving time, when the weather starts getting cold, and you know, hopefully she's quit deadheading her roses a little while ago,
Hopefully so.
they're not encouraging new growth.
Yeah.
But we cut them back roughly, depends on the variety, to about 36 inches, 48 inches, so that they're not top heavy, because
Okay.
most of the roses are grafted, you know, and it could loosen them up and all that good thing. And don't do your finished pruning until around the 1st of March, when we think most of the winter weather's behind us, because if you do it now, and then we
Yeah.
have a severe winter,
New
you cut
growth,
it back
yeah.
this far, it's going to freeze back further, and you might not have anything left. So
Wow. So wind pruning.
wind pruning, so about
Okay.
roughly 30, 40 inches, depending on the strength of the plant.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so that's what you do at the Botanic Garden. How many roses do y'all have out there, by the way?
Not as many as we used to. I think probably around 400.
400.
A lot of roses.
That's a lot of
That's
roses.
still a lot of roses. Okay, here's our next question. I have what looks to be black mold on the leaves of my willow oak. What is causing that, and does it need to be treated now, Mr. D? What do you think about that?
Well, the black mold is probably sooty mold.
Probably is.
That is growing on the honeydew that's secreted by the oak lecanium scale. And, you know, if it's probably not, if it's a large, I mean, we don't know what size tree this is,
Yeah.
but probably no reason to treat it. The only reason, the only type tree I would treat would be a small specimen plant.
Sure,
And
sure.
but that's what the deal is. And the oak lecanium scale, it has one one generation per
Generation,
year,
right.
and I guess that the crawlers should be emerging right about now.
It should be, if not earlier. Not,
Yeah, a little
yeah,
earlier
not
than
last
right
month.
now,
yeah.
but in the springtime is when you actually see the large soft-bodied scale, or late winter, when you see the large soft-bodied scale on the oak limbs and the branches.
And they're pretty recognizable. They look like little bumps, you know, pretty much on the twigs, on the branches
Sure.
themselves. So that you can see them pretty good.
And don't you think the mold usually is secondary to some insect
it is.
infestation?
It is.
I mean, I feel like that's the case most of the time.
It is.
Usually aphids.
Yeah,
usually,
yeah,
you know,
sure.
you know.
Yeah, you know, you can ride down the road, and I've seen a couple of willow oaks, and you can just look at them until they're dark. You know, have the dark leaves at sooty mold.
Right.
So I automatically know, hey, it must be a scale up there.
Sure.
And they're causing that damage.
Well, and you see it on camellias and
you see
hollies
it on
and
all
everything.
kind of things
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
You know.
Some years are worse than others. This was not a particularly bad lecanium year, was it?
No,
You know,
no. Hadn't had too many calls at the office about that. Just a few.
Plants weren't distressed because we had more rain too.
No, nice mild summer. All right, well, Rick, Mr. D, we're out of time. Remember, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a letter or an email with your gardening questions. Send your email to familyplot@wkno.org. The mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. We're down to the last few episodes before we go dormant for the winter months. So get those letters and emails to us as soon as possible. I'm Chris Cooper. Be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.